Yep, sounds good. Morning, Ray.
Hi, everyone. Hey, Hank, Alyssa, Carsten, I see Roy, Ray, Ori, Ole. Thank you all for joining.
Good morning.
You still sound tired, Ray? Or was that Roy?
Roy, I'm not overly tired.
Hank, you are connected already?
Yeah, I was checking my audio. Now it's working, I think. Is this working?
Yep.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think we should get started. I will take some notes as well. So anyone else has a chance to take some notes, that would obviously be fantastic. But I will try to do my best. So for today's meeting, we want to talk about a few things. First of all, we had a little bit of a break to find out what the meeting slot should be, and we ended up with the meeting slot we had before. So a little bit of detour, but here we are. The topics, as John sent around already in the email to the list, we wanted to talk a little bit about the DIT topic, and specifically following up on the discussions we had a few months ago on the mailing list about DITs in general, which we unfortunately didn't conclude. I reread the mailing list discussion, and there were a bunch of good comments, but no real conclusion. So we need to make a step forward on this. We also want to talk about the hackathon as a preparation for the next IETF meeting, to work on some, like we did at the last hackathon, work on running code and to move that forward. And then we also want to create an agenda item for the next meeting, for the next week's call, so I can also make the announcement and update the meeting invite. I think, and we can discuss that later, I think registration policy would be a good topic to make some progress on there as well. Okay. Any other topics you guys want to discuss? Ray?
I'll just say that since it's been a long time, I think it would be good, and I think there's been some progress made in the architecture or whatever, the editors meeting regarding the I just forgot what I was going to say. Oh, from the hackathon, the things that I thought were important there were the fact that if we're going to have a receipt or some way for the public or the user groups to check on the integrity of the log, the append only log, then there needs to be some additional information that varies based on architectural law, and that we want it to be variable. So that was one of the, seemed like, loose items from that came out of the hackathon. I think there was one other one, but I was super impressed. I think everybody was with. I want to participate in those. Those look like the best part of the IETF meeting. So maybe I'll try to do that more next time. Okay, that's my input.
Thank you. Thanks for it. John, do you want to say a few words about the hackathon topic, because you have been presenting the status last time?
Yep. Yeah, I can do that. So yeah, I'm sure some folks didn't see it. There's a link I can throw into chat probably when I'm not talking, which is about a 10-minute hackathon readout. But the basic thing that we did was Mike Riekert and a few other folks at Microsoft were working on an open source kind of SCITT emulator, as they called it, which is a client behaving to the best of our knowledge against the draft REST API, and a server that just takes signed statements and sticks them in a ledger, gives you a cozy receipt back, and then you can verify that on the other end. So that was all sort of pre-work ahead of the hackathon. Then at the hackathon itself, we showed a couple of interoperable implementations of that. So Ori and Transmute have an encoding and decoding tool that's able to take signed statements, cozy sign one statements, throw them in, make a receipt, and then check that all of that works. And that was interoperable with the open source sort of test client. And what I did was slightly different. I gave the draft spec and a link to the Go Cozy library on GitHub, and told a couple of my engineering team to give it a go. So not only to implement the simple interoperable receipts format, but also to see how good the quality of the spec is, whether people could actually follow it who aren't really involved. So although they're in my company, these two particular folks have never touched SCITT or attended one of these meetings or anything like that. And happily, they were also able to do that. So one really important thing that we proved, which I think has been a question over time, was that the minimal cozy receipt format, which is essentially an enumeration and a Merkle tree proof, a packed Merkle tree proof, that actually works. 3 different independent implementers all did it, and we all have cryptographically verifiable open source implementations of SCITT receipts in that format that's prescribed in the current draft architecture. So yeah, we actually had an end-to-end implementation with My Live Service and with Transmute and Microsoft also taking a JSON structure, calling it a claim, signing it, submitting it to a service over the standard API, and getting back a fully offline, independently verifiable receipt in the cozy format. So it was pretty decent, really, and it didn't take terribly long, which is great. So I'm going to stop there because there's a person in the queue that doesn't answer Ray's very specific question about verifying the ledger, but we can come to that in a second. Roy?
Thanks, John. There were some other reviews that we did at the hackathon through the architecture's document. I had some open questions that we still have pending issues that we have to go through. There was also the spin-off work into the COSI group for trying to get Merkle proof receipt approved. The other comment of people realize is due to reductions in some of the stuff Microsoft was doing, the team that was working on the open source emulator was let go. So trying to reshuffle that and adapt with all the other tasks that were also impacted across the company and pick that up. So we're a little bit quiet in the Microsoft side, but we're still actively working through all the other issues we have at this point. John did a good job of enumerating how interop worked. We're still trying to figure out some of the future proofing that we needed to do around how we do federation and how do we deal with some of the bigger aspects of it. And I still think we're working through those. So there's open questions. To raise question, I always thought at some point we may need an out for the various implementations to do a very deep audit of ledgers, and I'm willing to be proven wrong on that conversation.
Roy, is the code that you've been working on, is that public? Has that been sort of published despite all the developments in Microsoft?
So the answer to that, they're in a completely different group than I am, and I'm floating around the company. So no, I have not seen what they've done. I have to go find that code from Shiv and others and see if I can pull it into another group or take ownership of the repo. So I can't comment on it at this point.
Okay, work in progress. Okay. John, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so let me put that link in as well. So that at least the code up to the point of the hackathon, plus some work that's been going on in a branch, is open source and is available. I'm an admin. A number of folks in the working group are admins on that that repo, and frankly, everybody's welcome, obviously. So let me stick that in the. I'll stick it on the end there. There you go. My stuff isn't pushed. It's on a branch, so it is public and readable, but it's out on a branch only because it refers to a commercial product. There's no interference with the open source code, but we weren't quite sure whether we wanted to push that or when we would want to push that before there's a second alternative. But anyone who wants to see it working or whatever, I'm happy to go with the will of the group, how quickly we do that. So to the question, the very interesting question about how deep of an audit we need to do with ledgers. I think that's a great question, because the more we prescribe that, the more we will restrict innovation in how things are actually protected. So Transmute and Archivist both use Merkle trees. I'm not quite sure what Transmute uses. I just use Ethereum. And the auditability of all of these things is relatively straightforward because it follows the auditability of hundreds of other sort of blockchain type networks. We use completely standard code, we use quorum, we use consensus tools, and we use regular Merkle trees and regular confidential transaction math for doing the key distribution federation. So it's highly auditable and verifiable. Given just a few roots of trust, plus whatever admin keys and root passwords and whatever you need to look at, but that will always be there. So if we want to just say that something based on a Merkle tree is what we mean, then actually it's relatively straightforward. There are very good commercial companies out there who are able to do those kinds of audits and to prove whether or not you have genuine decentralization, all that kind of thing. With my chair hat off, I would say that's great because that suits me in my commercial capacity, because that's the product I've got. With a sort of standards development hat on, or my chair hat on, I would suggest it might stifle innovation somewhat, because I can see quite a lot of circumstances where that complete sort of network-based or fully decentralized or consensus-based thing isn't necessarily the best choice, and we could have a different kind of append-only ledger enforced by different maths or different code. But obviously that would make it much harder for us to prescribe, other than thou shalt go through some sort of audit. It would make it very hard for us to prescribe the technical points of that audit. So I don't know if you had actual thoughts, Ray, on what you would want to see, or whether it was just a kind of general good practice question.
No, I think I'm kind of with you on that. I would not want to get too balled up in that, because I do agree that there are these already existing systems that can provide that functionality, and so then either, because I was kind of reflecting on the thing that happened with the timestamps, where they can give you a timestamp, but you kind of don't know if you can trust it, and then to figure out if you can trust it may be nearly impossible. And so if it is based on an existing a service like QLDB or a Merkle tree that is well defined, then maybe we can get out of really exposing too much there and just say it has to be done, or have some kind of principles for how the SCITT ledger or audit log, whatever the thing is, the registry will be audited by someone else, because I don't think most people using this want anything to do with an audit. They just want to be able to trust that the audit's being done. And so I'm with you. I won't talk anymore right now, but I noticed, and I mentioned here, I thought Ori had something that was pretty cool, a paper that was written on that. I don't know if that is applicable. Maybe Ori wants to say something about it.
Yeah, I wonder whether
hand up.
I wonder whether this whole audit topic is something that can be dealt with, let's say, in a paragraph in the architecture document, but is otherwise beyond the scope of the group, because in general, for IETF groups, I would argue it's of course important in sort of for the deployment and so on, but I don't think we need to worry too much about it. Like
personally, I think if we can do the basic audit, not a deep audit, and we can get to graduated levels.
Well, maybe Roy, you need to explain what you mean by audit, because who would?
Okay, so just hang on. So
yeah,
if there's some consistency for the receipt and the append-only log that we can make consistent, that's fine. But I tend to agree with John. The issues of what do you do 15 years from now if the thing has been put on tape and into stone, Iron Mountain. Those things are not going to be always available online. So we need kind of this, what are we going to do sort of conversations. And I agree with John that getting too deep will kind of stifle innovation of what the brand new shiny product that might be around the corner might be.
Yeah, John, go ahead.
Yeah, by way of just making sure we actually get our outcomes and things. Maybe this is another candidate for one of the priority work items, because we did promise some months ago now to get the security target done. And a good way of dealing with this might be to add operational or key integrity requirements to the security target. And then the audit question simply becomes, all of these things are adhered to. So yeah, no single human shall have access to the root signing key of a timestamp server. Is pretty reasonable. So maybe we could potentially add some work item time to spend more time on the security target.
I think it's going to be important to do. It's going to be more complex than that. Having just one person, or like saying more than one person, isn't enough. I'll tell you right now. But I think having a way to say, okay, for this, maybe we can profile it later. I don't want to. I brought this up only because I thought it was something that did need to be done. I don't know if we need to do it right now. There's a lot of things that seem like they could be more easily dealt with than this. This is a pesky issue, and so I'm certainly think we should acknowledge that it exists, and then work on it, like you say, with a paragraph or something later. Thank you.
Okay. To circle back to the meeting, to the discussion we had just earlier about the hackathon, I think for us, it would be good to know about who is interested to do a little bit of preparation work for the hackathon. Like, I know there's still some time to do that work, but I think it would be worthwhile to have a separate conversation about what we could focus on during the hackathon, who is writing what code, so we can actually show something afterwards. Dick, are you volunteering to join that? Because you are raising your hand right now.
Yeah. Hello, Hannes. Hello, everyone. Yes, the REA would like to be a consumer side tester. So we'd be interested in writing whatever software is needed to query, transparency service. So that's the part we have the most interest in. Thanks.
Cool. Okay. And Ray already mentioned earlier that he would be interested in. I assume, John, I can definitely put your name down.
Yeah, I'll be able to put a couple of people on it.
Yeah, I definitely want to do that to demonstrate how it can be used in this use case.
Cool. What about the others? Hank and I see Ori and Roy. I'll let you think about it, but hopefully you join that development as well.
In the chat,
right?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Or myself will be there.
Cool. Okay. And you would be most interested in the sort of like the ledger type of side of things, or more on receipts or APIs, or what?
I'll have to figure out where we're short, and I'll try and get other people to fill in. But I think the ABI stuff and the rest of it is something that we have to get further along on.
Okay. But I will write down your name, so that's good. Hank, you just jumped into the queue?
Yeah, because too many mute buttons. I was not muting here, but on my headphone, I forgot that. So, yeah, so interesting topics to work on is, if you're coming over and over this again, we have to consolidate, and this is a long-term work thing, but it has to be done. The policies enforced for an issuer to write a signed statement to the transparency service, so it becomes a transparent statement. That thing has to be gatekept. There has to be a gatekeeper function here. And we're calling this gatekeeper function, and that's up to discussion. That's a great name, a registration policy. And I think that really ripples through a lot of other work, because ideally such a registration policy would allow for a marshalling and encoding and CBOR. That would be nice. So that kicked off other things that we are trying to figure out right now, because we will definitely not invent a totally new policy language. That doesn't make sense. But there are candidates out there that are prominent, virtually everybody can agree upon, and they're using JSON, and that is very close to using CDDL to CBOR. in the end. And let's find out that how much we can done until the next hackathon meeting on that front. Because why is that so important? Because these can change, and the receipts probably, and that's a point of discussion I think we have to consolidate at 717, is that the receipt will have to present some indication which policy was in place when the signed statement was accepted. Because if for a minute a registration policy changed and it was accepting some nonsense, so to speak, this becomes garbage in, garbage out, and therefore will lose the property of trust, obviously. So you have to find out for deep audit, and I think that's one of the things you want to deep audit at some time. What was the threshold for policies applied, for checking them? Was it in scope to basically weasel this in, or was it like a hard atomistic thing that was making it basically on a fundamental level incapable of weaseling it in? And I think that's a very important thing for the one of the T's in SCITT. And so I assume that all this discussion we're doing right now on the how encoding and not to reinvent wheels for policy language will end up in a representation in the receipt. But that is a long road. There's a lot of ifs here. We will try to check as many boxes as possible until the next IETF meeting to have some better understanding. Then I think that's an important item we have to deal with on a daily basis, basically, until then.
Okay. Yeah, I added some notes to the meeting minutes. Please check what I like. Obviously, very brief captures what you had in mind. But that's already pretty good, and I hope the others who didn't say anything are also thinking about attending the hackathon and contributing something to their work. I assume Ori is going to work on the receipts, but I don't think he's listening right now. Good. Okay. John, is there something else to add to that hackathon? I think that's pretty good already. I will send out an email to the list to see whether there's someone else who hasn't had a chance today to join the meeting and would otherwise start to plan for the hackathon itself for the next one.
Great. So I think just two short things. So yeah, that's enough. I do want to echo the point that Roy sort of almost made. Which is that there was a lot of other work. So it wasn't just the code ready. There was a lot of spec hacking, and that's important too. So we might expect people to show up at the hackathon simply to do dedicated editing and complicated spec work, and that's all great. The other thing is just to make an appeal, I suppose. We have landed by default on sort of registration policies being the thing we prove. We did sort of think as chairs, as we looked through all of the activity, registration policy seems to be the thing that is most wanted and most valuable to work towards at 117. I just want to put out an explicit appeal to ask if anybody thinks that isn't the sort of area we should be targeting for 117, or if there's a different candidate. And hearing none, let's call it done. So yeah, that's great, Hannah. So if you can just send out that mail to the list, that would be cool.
Yeah. Okay. That was the hackathon. Now jumping to the DIT topic, and maybe I summarize how I understood sort of where we are today. So we had an email discussion. I will look up the link. It was a good thread. Various people provided feedback, and my impression was that there were two DIT methods, and I will also post a link into the chat box, namely the DIT key method and the DIT web method. And both of those methods are not actually finalized yet. So they are work in progress specifications. My understanding is that the key method is less mature than the web method, but both of them were mentioned. I read through both of them, and the web method roughly works as follows. So the idea is that you have this DIT document, and which includes keys, public keys. It's kind of almost like you can almost think of it as a certificate encoded in JSON. Maybe it doesn't do it justice, but that's sort of the shorthand version. And there is a URL to identify that specific DIT document. And in the case of the DIT web method, it's there's always a URI scheme, which is DIT web, and then followed by, in the simplest case, by a domain name where the DIT document is actually stored. And so the idea is then, and then there are variations with paths and so on. We'll ignore those, but the idea is that you as a developer, you have a domain name, and you store your DIT document in a specific place on that domain. And if you send someone, or someone has access to your DIT web URL, they can basically find the key in that, or the whole DIT document and the corresponding key. And applied to the SCITT case, that would mean that this developer then obviously is in possession somehow of the private key and stores it somewhere, hopefully secure, on his development machine. And then he uses that to first gather the statements and then to sign the statements using that private key, and then send that signed statement to the append-only ledger, which then looks at this and retrieves the DIT document, verifies also the signature, and then does all sorts of other processing. And then finally, if everything is successful, it turns the receipt that we talked about before. That's kind of the way how I understood it. And but of course, none of this is described anywhere. And so I'm wondering whether I understood it correctly. And what Ecker specifically was asking for in that email discussion was to ideally select a small number or even one of those DIT methods, because there are many of them registered, and to describe it as applied to SCITT, and to elaborate on the security properties of that scheme then, because the other method, which I didn't talk about, the DIT key method, is very different. And there are many others. So, and I think that's definitely something we need to do. And if that would also be, in my opinion, a good target for a hackathon activity, to get that DIT handling in quotes identity management covered, because that was also a significant difference to the SIG-Store project, which used OpenID Connect and ephemeral public-private keys, as you heard. I think it was in January when we had that presentation. So did any of that, what I said, make sense?
Yeah, Hannes, in fact, what I'd like to suggest is that we start with a pretty simple use case for the hackathon. And I'd like to put forward a proposal that we demonstrate how SCITT can be used to supply consumers with software trust scores, as one simple example of how SCITT could be used. And so I'd like to propose that we go ahead and say that one use case to consider for the hackathon is the distribution of software trust scores. Thank you.
Okay. That's fine. Good. Any other thoughts on this one? Or did anyone look at other methods which weren't mentioned in the discussions, and probably they are more favorable for use with SCITT than the DIT web and the DIT key method?
I guess just a technical note. that we did use OIDC for all of the hackathon targets, and it works really nicely. So there is a question over the kind of application level implementation versus the core root standard elements of persistent data. So I think didweb, didkey are perfectly fine to be proxied through and use OIDC, but just worth bearing in mind.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that? What do you mean? Like, of course, in the didweb case, there is the assumption that somehow the developer is able to load the did document securely onto his web page. It's obviously something that is kind of out of scope. Or where did you? Is that the place where you used OpenID Connect, or somewhat totally different?
It was for the pass-through authentication for the REST API. So this was all headless, but transiting a common, the way the emulator works, which is quite neat, really, is that the client is a single client that absolutely anybody can use, no matter what services they are interacting with. And then you just specify as a configuration which service you want any particular request to go to. So there's only one piece of client code and one client authentication to do. And then that gets sent through to a separate backend, which could be Archivist, it could be an emulator, it could be, Carfax probably for Dick or anybody else. So OIDC is just a really nice way of collecting up all of these different application level claims, to reuse an unhelpful word, and transit those through multiple authentication contexts. And it works really nicely with the standard web frameworks and request tool belt and stuff like that. So for the REST API and for the standard client, it was a really nice way of getting the auth data through. But of course, auth and ID are not exactly the same thing. So the identity primitive itself and things like proof of possession of a key, those are separate to creating an OIDC context in the first place. So I don't see any problem as such. It's just a practical thing to think about how we would, I guess, a warning not to pollute what is identity and what is authorization, because they're different.
Mm. Dick, do you want to? Did you join the queue?
Yeah, I'm trying to get back in. Thank you, Hannes. So one thing I would like to see if we can do it is set up a testbed page somewhere on Data Tracker or wherever we want to, that has all the details about which services are available, documentation on how to interface with those services. And if you do have any code like what John was describing, like a client code that calls the APIs, having that available through that one testbed type page, I think would be very beneficial. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Dick, we can actually put links to implementations to the sort of working group page. There's a separate sort of, with each specification, there's a separate sort of item, related implementations, I think it's called, where we could include pointers to those implementations. So that may actually be quite useful.
Okay, I know it would be for us, because we would be looking to try all the various services that are out there to confirm that the interoperability is consistent across the ones that we'd be communicating with. And we'd like, if there is available tooling like what John's describing, we'd certainly like to be able to use that and test that as well. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I will. I guess, John, you had a couple of links in your presentation. I need to look that up and add that to the, for example, to the architecture specification as these related implementations. I think that could help. But question to you, John. Did you document the use of OpenID Connect for these RESTful APIs somewhere? Because I think that's something that is missing in the architecture specification. Maybe it could be described, right?
It could. It was actually Mike Rickert who put it in. So I guess I didn't put it in my work product. It is part of the readout. So if we take the hackathon slides, which is just part of the standard deck. So everybody here has access to the 116 materials, and the ignore the chair materials. That's just the standard, fire escape stuff. But the actual presentation materials includes the kind of the end-to-end flow, and OIDC is in there, and it is documented very briefly in one of Mike's pull requests. It's probably not as clear as it might be. So let's take a look. I mean, it would go, maybe Dick, you and I could have a chat offline and see how easy it is for you to pick up the stuff that we've done already, and then anything that's not clear, that clearly becomes a candidate for being better documented on the in the README rather than just in PRs.
Yeah, that's a great idea, John. I'm happy to work with you on that. We've worked with Archivist in the past, and we've successfully tested with you guys. So we sort of have a sense for what you're doing over there. But anything you can put specifically for this purpose, where we're doing some real SCITT-like API interaction, that would be fantastic. But we'll work.
Yeah, so we've got
thanks.
Brilliant. So we've got the open source thing. I put those links in the hedge doc notes already for this meeting. So yeah, we'll work on all the open source stuff, the SCITT community stuff, and yeah, good. I don't think it should be too hard.
I looked at the John. I looked at the slide. You didn't include the links into the slides, but so like I think maybe we need to also on the description that Mike has been working on. We need to look this up. I think this would be good material for a next draft iteration, architecture draft.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, that's not too much.
I see that Ori has posted into the chat when he talked about the resolution. The DID resolution was something I didn't look at. So this may be yeah. Thanks for sharing. Ori, are you available to briefly summarize the DID resolution mechanism?
Yeah. So many folks were frustrated with what the DID working group chose to standardize and chose not to standardize. And one of the sort of contentious points was DID resolution, which is the process that converts a DID URL into a representation of a DID document or a particular key within a DID document. And so this community group specification here describes DID resolution from the perspective of an HTTP web server. So this is a middleware component that you can take a dependency on if you need to resolve any DID method, regardless of what kind of method it is. But then you need a trusted resolver because obviously you're returning key material, and it's important that you trust the thing that you're getting public keys from. So that's kind of like the basics of how DID resolution works. You take a DID URL in, you get back a DID document, which contains keys in various relationships. For us, the relationships we would care about are the authentication relationship and the assertion method relationship. And then inside of those relationships are specific key serializations, usually in JWK or multi-base format. And so if you want to resolve a particular key used to sign a JSON web token or a CBOR, cozy sign 1, you need to look inside of the DID document in the particular relationship you're expecting, find the public key, and then use that to verify the signature.
Cool. Thanks, Ori. When do you expect the specifications, the DID methods, to be finalized, or is it a working, sort of a living document?
It's not a living document. The working group's currently not active. There's a chartering process for the next charter version of the working group. That chartering process is being held up because of W3C process and politics. And most of the folks working on DIDs also work on verifiable credentials. And so that working group's currently active. And so a lot of their time is being spent on deliverables for the verifiable credentials working group currently. I think the next charter for the DID working group will allow either a concrete specification of what DID resolution means, or concrete specification of a single specific DID method, like a standard one. It's just incredibly politically contentious, that second part, because obviously standardizing a particular method raises the specter of, particular vendor technologies or blockchain or these other things. And so there's a lot of frustration over, like, many people don't want the W3C to standardize a particular DID method. They want W3C to define resolution for all DID methods. And other people want it to just define DID web, for example, and not define resolution for all DID methods. So that's kind of what's going on right now. I think the expected timeline is like years for getting a DID method through the standardization process at W3C. It could be done at IETF, by the way. Like you could create a DID method and standardize it at IETF. But it's still, that's a lot of work that has to be done. That's it.
Yeah. I'm just only worried a little bit because there's obviously a dependency, and having at least one method described very clearly would provide a lot of benefits to developers. And ideally, it would be just finalized already, and we would not have to worry about it. Because the DID key method, which I didn't talk about, that is so different to the DID web method. Obviously, because otherwise, why would you have to? But it leaves out a lot of the sort of challenging aspects. Like it just has if I understand it correctly, the URL has just the key in there, so that, and the public key in a specific encoding. So yeah, it's obviously different. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Uri, for the DID JWK, which I didn't look at. So that wasn't raised in the discussions, but I definitely think that Ecker's right in the sense that we need to at least have one method clearly explained, and not the method explained, but how it relates and is used in SCITT. So that would be important. Okay, good. Ray, what is your question? How does this square with key trends? What do you mean?
I think that it sounds similar to the, it seems similar to the initiatives that were very interesting at the last IETF meeting regarding how to make, your public keys available. I don't know if that was a good match for SCITT. The DID stuff, and I'm going to have to read this some more and study it. I'm trying to get some time to really spend, but it seems like it's okay with SCITT for us to have a little bit less, more constrained access to the keys, but maybe not. It seemed like that whole thing about whether you were talking about putting the public key in a URL. I hadn't seen that one. But the concept of how do you provide the public keys, etc., was the subject of all those discussions that were pretty interesting. Okay, so anyway, it's in the same realm of I think, but I don't want to belabor it. I think that I'm just going to. I see Ori has answered this a little bit. Thank you, and I will study it some more. But we do need that. We need a way to provide public keys in my situation, I'm also looking at how do I provide the public keys of devices which have a private key that's nested inside and that no one can get to, and I need to have all those public keys posted somehow, and so it doesn't need to be too fancy, but just I think if we could just say, okay, here's how you do it. You post them like this to secure it like this, and it's done. But I'm probably smoothing over a lot of details. Okay, enough from me. Thanks.
Yeah, I unfortunately cannot tell you on how it relates to key trans because I wasn't at that meeting. So we'll have to reach out to the chairs to see what the next steps there are. Hank, you raised your hand.
Yeah. I was coming back to the horrible words that some STO is slower than the IETF. Sorry. And so no, yeah, we can do our own DID flavor. So what I would, so my naive and hopeful nature, and to love it and dear so much. And so so my proposal would be that we mimic the resolution of DID URIs for today, as that described by W3C. We implement the naive version of it, see what fails, what works, make our own addendums to them, find out when W3C moves again. If they move into a different directive, do it here and create another flavor. Because we can't stall on so we're not doing DIDs because DID is so cool. We are doing DIDs because we need flexibility and identity document agility. And we can't be stuck into PKIX because that won't work for long. And so, so I think the DID route is an escape mechanism to allow to move from various continuums to others, create conduits between them, and allow for different identity document formats to interoperate. And if that can't be achieved in the near-term goal by a W3C stable DID web, well, then we have to act. But we have to also implement. So I think the hackathon and the implementations and the text we write will show what's working and what is not working. If we are diverging from essential decisions from the W3C at some point, we have to splinter off, I would be assuming. So that's my point of view. So we shouldn't be deterred by the indecisiveness and the politicalness of the W3C. We should take this as an opportunity to test it thoroughly and have our own opinion.
Thanks for the positive words, Hank. Dick.
Thank you, Hannes. So I'm not familiar with DID, so maybe my question is really sort of irrelevant, but here it is. We use standard PKI type technologies in libraries to do things like certificate, verification and other certificate processing. Will we be able to use the existing certificate processing tools that we use today as part of this, or is DID something completely different?
I think, I'm not going to jump in.
Ori, looks like you might have an answer.
Yeah, sounds like.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you have a key that is a certificate and you're dereferencing it from a DID URL, then you can think of certificates as kind of fitting inside of DIDs. Okay. But I think from an identity perspective, like they in some ways solve the same problems as Hannes mentioned. So, DIDs were designed to hopefully be backwards compatible with certificates, although there was people who tried really hard to make that not possible. So they can be used together, but I think if you're entering a world where you're specifying both interfaces, that's going to eventually become sort of problematic for implementers because they're going to be carrying that if statement everywhere around in their code. That's it.
Okay, so it sounds like you pick one or the other. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, you could pick DIDs and then you could use certificates inside of it, or you can pick certificates and DIDs and have to handle the switch statement everywhere.
I see. Okay, so can we agree on the at least a hackathon to say, you know, there's going to be DID with a payload containing certificates in the standard DER form?
Mm-hmm. Well, we can, of course, and that's also, I think, what Eka asked us to write about, is like to have that written down and analyzed and to see what the results are. The hackathon would give us the extra bonus of seeing how the experience looks like after doing that. So it sounds like a very useful exercise for us.
Yeah, so that'll be a decision point that we have to include in the hackathon design. Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, just quickly adding to Dick's proposal that this is a fallback use case. So if you can't do the connection between the old continuum of PKX and new continuum of the flexibility of DID resolution, well, what's the point, right? So I think, yeah, that should be a use case that is a checkbox for the hackathon.
Yeah, and Hank, what I suggested earlier, and just one idea, of course, is that the attestation material actually be something really simple, like as simple as a trust score, you know, and then this just to keep things as simple as possible.
Ori, a question for you. In the DID case, is there a way to sort of, instead of using a key structure, cozy key structure in, or not a cozy, a JSON web key structure with the, let's say for elliptic curve cryptography, XY coordinates, instead use an X509 certificate, like let's say subject public key info or something like that?
Yeah, so the DID spec describes these things as verification material, and it supports basically two formats that are acknowledged in the specification. One is public key multi-base, which uses multi-base encoding, which is not standard but popular in the blockchain community. And the other format is public key JWK, which supports the X5U and X5C parameters that are used for working with certificates. You could also do, public key PEM or certificate. You can invent your own, object that's going to be included in the verification method that's going to be used for verification. And then you can include that object in the DID document. But obviously, not all DID methods will support your new object representation for verification. And I mean, that might not be a huge issue if you're also making a DID method at the same time. But if you're trying to make this work with every DID method out there, which I don't think anybody should try and ever do, then you're better off sticking to JWK, in my opinion.
And would that, thanks, Ori. Would there actually be a sort of a cozy-based variant of this as well? Because for in other places we talk about like using a cozy CBOR / cozy based structure,
yeah,
rather than the JSON based version. Is that
I would not encourage anyone to use cozy based structures for key representations currently. It's very hard to get like library support that understands cozy keys, and there's tremendous amounts of contention over cozy key formats on the cozy working group list. I think JWK is a much better portable key format for this particular layer. However, having said all of that, there was at one point a DID document format that was CBOR based, and there was an attempt to support cozy, and it received so little contribution in the DID working group that it got moved to a note but I can share the note with you all.
Well, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, but just a question, because if you send the DIT web URL, then obviously that's just a domain name plus a path element, and then all the other stuff would happen in the backend, and then you would be fine using JSON-based things in the backend anyway, right? I assume that's a yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
so speaking
Okay.
for Ori, and he can object, that's a yes.
Thank you. I see that we already exceeded our time. So I think in terms of the DIT conversation, I think what would be good is to get a few interested parties together and write something up so that we maybe a page or so, which we could then stick into the architecture document, providing readers a little bit more background into how we plan to use these different technologies in combination. Would anyone be interested in that? Sort of call it a design team or whatever you like, but just a few people who are knowledgeable in that area and interested to write something up so that we can push the ball forward. Joy?
Hi, just a clarification question. So then you mentioned an architecture document. So would this text go into an already existing architecture document, or are you asking about interest or volunteers for writing a new architecture document that would mostly cover DIT methods?
Yeah, I was thinking more. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I was thinking more about the existing architecture document because it, like, content-wise, I believe it fits in there, and also I hope it's not such a long text that it actually justifies its own document. And I agree with Ori and Hank previously that at this point in time I don't think we have anywhere in our charter an attempt to rewrite or produce new DIT method specifications or rewrite an existing one and making an IETF specification. So in that sense, I think it's mostly about clarifying on how we use an existing technology in our context. Does that make sense?
That definitely answers my question, and I think it does make sense. If that's good to note, thank you.
Would you be willing to contribute to that work?
Without making big commitments right now, I would be inclined to say yes, but this would be something that I would need to, take back to the team and discuss a bit more.
Perfect. Yeah, please let John and myself know whether you have some spare cyclists. Obviously, always appreciated, right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, and of course to everyone else, think about it, and because I would like to move this topic forward so we can next week we'll talk about the registration policy, unless there's some other suggestions, and I will send a mail about the hackathon topic as well. Anything else? We are a few minutes over time already.
I'm good.
Cool. Thanks. John, anything from your side?
Yeah, I've got a bug report for Meet Echo. Yeah, no, nothing for me. Thanks everybody. I think this is a good restart. So we know what we're targeting for next week. We know what we're targeting for the hackathon. I think that's a good thing. So thanks very much.
Yeah. Thanks to all, and hear you next week.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.